Many people are wondering how to heal their grief, how to heal their sadness. But that's not the way I see it. We don't actually heal our grief, we actually grieve to heal. Sadness, grief, despair, regret, hopelessness. These can be some of the heaviest and hardest emotions to feel. And yet, these are the emotions that have come to set us free. So, if you are interested in learning everything you need to know about your sadness, about all of the emotions in the sadness family, and how to work with them so that you can let go of what no longer serves you, and so that you can heal everything that needs to be healed, then please give this video a like, hit subscribe, and let's get into it. Hello, my name is Lisa with Lisa Heal Yourself, and today's video is an in-depth look at the emotions of sadness. And if you have been following along on this mini-series of emotions, you will know that we are looking at the big three: fear, anger, and sadness. And if you are interested in looking at an in-depth look of either fear or anger, I will link those videos below and at the very end of this video. So sadness is a really important emotion. And sadness is very different from both anger and fear. The anger and fear emotions are part of the fight or flight response. They are directly connected to our nervous system, and they are there to help us survive. The emotions in the sadness family are much different. These emotions are there to help us let go, to help us heal, and to help us transform. Sadness and loss go hand in hand. Whether the loss that we're experiencing is completely outside our control, like a death in our family or the death of somebody that we love dearly, to a sudden breakup that we didn't see coming, to a catastrophic event, or any other form of loss that is completely outside our control. And then there is the loss that involves letting go of things that no longer serve us. So these are losses that are very deep and very difficult, but ones that we actually do have control over, ones that we make ourselves. We may choose to end a relationship, to end a job or a career, or recognize that our dreams or our goals no longer serve us, or that a way of life, our beliefs, our worldview, or even our entire identity is no longer healthy or fulfilling for us, and we must let go and make a change. This type of loss that's self-initiated is no less important or consequential in our depth of feeling this emotion. Though most of the loss that you feel when you are suffering with chronic illness, chronic pain, or long-lasting conditions or symptoms is usually the loss that is mostly outside of our control and leaves us with a sense or a feeling of powerlessness. Loss like this, or the loss of the death of somebody very close to us, or the death of our own dreams, that leaves us with a sense of powerlessness and that's completely outside of our control, usually leads to victim consciousness and a victim mindset because we feel so powerless. And the intensity of the loss is so uncontrollable that we aren't sure that we can survive the depth of the emotion of sadness and grief and loss and regret and hopelessness and despair that comes with it. Today, we are going to break down these emotions so that you can see that the emotion of sadness and all of the emotions in the sadness family are actually gifts and move you towards your healing. They move you towards growth. They move you towards expansion, and they move you towards transformation. Nothing can crack you open like the feelings in the sadness family. So often, the emotions within the sadness family get lumped together, but they're actually very different. So we're going to start by breaking these apart. So sadness, as you know, is an emotion. And an emotion are feelings, thoughts, and sensations in the body that are driven by energy. So when we're talking about the feeling of sadness, this is usually described as being extremely heavy. There can be a lot of aching sensations with sadness, aching in the chest, in the heart area, a sense of abandonment or emptiness, and a sense of disappointment or loss. So, evolutionarily and biologically speaking, sadness has always been the most important emotion in helping us process loss, in letting go, in growth, and in adapting to change. So, through the years, as our species have evolved, we experience loss along the way, loss of something that is extremely valuable to you, whether it is your family, your spouse, your partner, your tribe, resources, goals, dreams, whatever it is that is lost. Sadness shows us how valuable it was to us. Sadness shows us that we needed it and we still need it in our life. And sadness shows us that something is over, showing us that we need to learn to adapt and change and move on, and that we need to find a way to move on while honoring what has been lost and learning to adapt and change and grow and open so that we can find something similar because we need what has been lost. So, sadness is an overarching broad term that we use for loss, and it really signifies the end of something and the needing to make a shift to a new way of living. So, sadness is the overall feeling, and it can come, like I said, with this physical sensation of heaviness, dull aches. It's usually not overwhelming, but it's lingering. There's a feeling or an emotion of sorrow, and also a sense of being isolated. And sadness usually asks us to stop, to pause. Sadness is a very grounding emotion. It wants us to stop and feel, to stop and process. So sadness is not an active emotion the way anger and fear are. It requires us to stop and process and feel and really get into the present moment. It wants us to process. It wants us to understand. It wants us to reflect. And it wants us to deeply reflect, on our soul, on our purpose, on who we are, on more esoteric questions in life. It wants us to reflect on our values. It wants us to reflect on our beliefs and our identity and who we believe ourselves to be. These are big, broad, life-changing questions. And these are the types of reflective questions that sadness asks us to stop and listen, to stop and look inside, to stop and feel, to stop and process. Some of the biggest gifts that sadness gives us is the gift of self-awareness, because it teaches us to really stop and look inward. It requires us to feel and to process our emotions. So it really helps us tune in, become self-aware, and tune into our own needs, our own sense of self. Sadness helps us to build compassion for others in the future, to build empathy for others in the future, because when somebody else experiences a loss like this, we now have built the muscle of compassion and empathy. And this helps us build stronger bonds with others and helps us to grow a closeness with others and to fill the gaps of loss by filling it with strengthening the bond with others. Sadness helps us attune to the present moment. Sadness is a present moment feeling, and it can encourage us to feel gratitude and cherish what's here in the present, what we still do have. It forces us to reevaluate our priorities and our values and place emphasis on what's most important to us and grow what's most important to us in our life. And it also teaches us patience and acceptance over the long run, because when we cannot change our situation, it takes patience to open and grow and evolve and transform through it, rather than the emotions of fear and anger, which are quite intense and immediate, which looks more for immediate change. Sadness helps us grow patience, and it helps us build the quality of acceptance into our life. So when you're working with sadness, of course, the most important tool, and this is the most important tool for all three of the big emotions, but is mindfulness. Coming into the present moment, really reflecting and feeling what's here is the main thing that sadness wants from us. And so meditating, sitting in a mindfulness practice really helps us tap into our sadness and feel exactly what needs to be felt, especially being able to feel this sadness without judgment, without criticism, and with a more mindful, accepting, compassionate, and loving present moment way of processing your sadness. Some of the other tools I like to work with are self-love and self-compassion, learning how to love yourself, to be unconditionally there for yourself, and to say and speak and treat yourself kindly and compassionately is one of the most healing things that you can do on any healing journey. And sadness really helps to bring out our vulnerable side. Sadness asks for self-love and self-compassion. It's looking to be held. It's looking to be reassured. It's looking to be loved. It's looking to be heard. It's looking to be understood. Inner child work is amazing for sadness because sadness wants us to heal our wounds, our deepest wounds. Sadness wants us to look at our deepest wounds, and it wants our truest, most authentic self, our adult self, our God self, to step in and to compassionately and lovingly fill us back up with everything that we need. Journaling can be excellent when we're dealing with sadness, and building connection with others. Again, a really important tool and technique for helping to heal sadness. I want to talk about the emotion of disappointment next. Disappointment is an emotion in the sadness family, and it comes when something doesn't meet our expectation, when life is different than we want it to be, when reality does not meet our desires, our goals, or our dreams. When reality falls short of our expectations or short of what we hoped for, and we end up feeling let down by others or by ourselves. This emotion is part of sadness, and it can be felt in small ways every day, and it can be felt deeply when we have deep, meaningful disappointments in our life. Some disappointment can be fleeting or temporary. It can lead to feelings of frustration and sadness. It can lead to feelings of being let down. Over time, it can be emotionally draining. It can deplete some of our emotional energy, because when our hopes are invested in something and our hopes aren't met, this can just drain our energy in general, leave us feeling fatigued. Repeated or deep disappointments can lead us down a path of not just sadness, but towards hopelessness. It can lead us to feelings of regret. It can lead us to feelings of uncertainty or confusion. But often, if we catch disappointment early enough, we can reframe it. We can reassess our goals. We can reassess or we can adjust our expectations, or we can double down and try harder. We can put in more work. We can realize whether this is a realistic or an unrealistic expectation that's leading to our disappointment. And we can either change it if it's unrealistic or work harder if it's realistic. It can really help us to build resilience in ourselves, to push harder for something that we truly want, to let go of things that we don't want, to reevaluate and refocus. It can help us adapt and learn and focus on new strategies. It can help us bounce back stronger. Disappointment really helps us clarify our values, clarify our desires, clarify what we want, clarify what's important. And disappointment can also help us to learn who we want to be and how we want to act and behave when things don't go our way, when expectations aren't met. It helps us determine who we want to be, what kind of person we choose to be, and whether we choose to give up or to keep going. So if you're dealing with small disappointments, they're really good practice opportunities to reframe, to work through, to build resilience, to change or adapt your expectations, to work with what's actually here, to accept the present, to work with self-love practices and self-compassion practices, and to work with how we speak to ourselves, what things we say, what things we choose to focus on, how we choose to live our life. Because evolutionarily and biologically speaking, disappointment is there so that we can recalibrate our goals, so that we can recalibrate and become very clear of what actions we need to take. It helps us to avoid future mistakes. It teaches us resilience. It helps us draw on our own strengths. It helps us to adapt to change. We know that disappointment is there to teach us to learn and grow. So depending on how many disappointments you repeatedly have or how large the disappointment is, there's a spectrum of learning, a spectrum of opportunity and shifts and growth that we can have with this emotion. There's a spectrum of recalibrating, of working with our goals, of learning to pick ourselves up, of learning how to be resilient, of bringing in strength and courage, of being able to handle setbacks, and of really just understanding that disappointment is a natural part of life. So it teaches us how to handle disappointments. It's really important that we learn how to handle and accept disappointment, because disappointments are a part of life. And it teaches us compassion, self-compassion. It teaches us to resource ourselves, to be able to become stronger and wiser and more confident and more empathetic and more compassionate, and to know what we want more and to help us grow more and to help us stay on track more. The feeling and emotion of disappointment is extremely useful for us. And even though it's uncomfortable, even though it comes with a heaviness, even though it can touch us into states of hopelessness or despair or victim consciousness through extreme or repeated disappointments in our life, this emotion holds immense power for healing, for personal growth, and for self-awareness. So learning to feel into it, to not push it down, to not ignore it, to not reject it, by bringing mindfulness to disappointment, by sitting and allowing disappointment to be there, by allowing yourself to feel it, and by allowing yourself the patience and the space to process. We do this through mindfulness and awareness practices. We do this through future visualization and reframing exercises. We do this through cognitive brain retraining, challenging negative thinking and negative patterns. And we do this through self-compassion and self-love exercises. And we do this by goal setting and reframing and new skill sets, new learning. So there are many different tools to work with the feelings of disappointment, but it's really important that we work with disappointments every time they're small, because as larger and bigger and more important disappointments come your way, it can be harder to work with them if we're not dealing with and working with all the smaller and more minor disappointments throughout our day and our life. So now I want to look at a much deeper form of sadness, which is grief. And for those of you who have ever had the deep sorrow and the deep loss, the deep loneliness, the deep disconnect, the deep sense of loss from the death of someone that you love and cherish, or the death of a dream, or the death of an important relationship in your life, or the loss of something that you value so deeply and extremely, then you have experienced grief. Grief tends to be much deeper and has a longer timeline than sadness. And grief, like sadness, is a blanket of emotion, but it also has much deeper valleys and it comes in waves. So grief is much more sorrowful, and it's not something that disappears quickly, although you can have good and bad moments, good and bad days within the cycle, the much, much longer cycle of grief. Grief is a slow process. It can last weeks, it can last months, it can last years, and in some cases, it can last decades or a lifetime. So, with grief, often the loss can feel extremely sudden or overwhelming. There's a lot of disbelief and mourning in a loss that you didn't expect to lose. So, sadness often comes with disappointment, but grief usually comes with a disbelief and an unwillingness to accept this loss in your life. There's an extreme resistance to accepting or moving past such a significant loss. So it's accompanied by a deep mourning period, but also a longer lasting sadness and sorrow that comes from not only losing the person or the relationship or the dream that was so significant in our life, but it comes from losing the part of ourself that dies along with that person, that dies along with that loss. There's a part of ourself, part of our identity, part of the fabric that makes up who we are that is directly tied to this person, relationship, or dream, that when it dies, when it is lost, parts of ourself die and parts of ourself are lost. So grief, is much deeper than sadness in the fact that we lose part of ourself. We lose part of our own identity. We lose the future that we imagined and that the future that we dreamed of that can no longer be, that can no longer exist without this person or without this relationship. And so our entire trajectory of our life and our future and our hopes and our dreams and our identity is lost and dies alongside the person or the thing that is actually lost. So grief, although one of the most difficult to process emotions, brings massive gifts and healing along with it. Grief helps us to honor what was lost, and it helps us to honor ourselves. It helps us to feel gratitude and appreciation for people, for our experiences, for our connections. And it really helps us to honor and value the things that have been lost. And that helps us to place a significant importance and value on those things, knowing that they made us who we are and that we can't go on without filling that gap in some way moving forward. Knowing that we can never replace what is lost, but we ultimately must open to something new in order for us to feel whole once again. Grief also helps us to change more than anything ever will. So learning how to accept and adapt to change is one of the things that human beings resist the most. And it can be one of the things that stops you on your healing journey the most, right? This resistance to change. Grief helps us by forcing us that we must accept change. It forces us to adapt and move on even when we don't want to. It forces us to change our identity, to change our beliefs, and to find new meanings in life and to give our life new purpose. The power of grief is that important. It is one of the most powerful emotions, and it's literally the only emotion that can cause us to find a completely new meaning in life, new purpose, build new identities, and force an adaptation or a change where we would never, ever, ever make one on our own. So grief really opens the door to a new purpose, to a new way of life. We don't want to open this door. Often when we've lost someone or something that is that valuable to us, we want to go back. We spend our time trying to figure out how we can go back, how we can get back what we had. But grief pushes us through a narrow door, showing us that we can actually never go back and that the only way through is forward. Grief forces us to reimagine who we are, to reimagine our dreams and our purpose, and to really reimagine what is and what can be true for us in our life. Grief helps us build resilience, which we need on this journey of life. It shows us that we're capable of handling even the deepest losses, that we never, ever thought that we were strong enough or capable of handling. And even when we feel like we're crumbling and falling and we will never get back up again, grief teaches us that in fact we are stronger than we ever knew, that we're more capable, more resilient, more courageous, and that we have more strength than we ever thought possible inside us. Deep grief is the only thing that can show us this, because it forces us to get up even when we can't. It forces us to keep going even when we have no strength left. Deep grief shows us how deep the well of our own capacity to endure and to renew actually is. So when you are working with grief, expression is key. Allowing yourself to feel completely and deeply and expressively is one of the most important things that you can do with grief. This means to cry deeply, uncontrollably, to speak, to talk about your grief, to write, to journal, to express your grief in every single way possible, to moan, to writhe, to feel it deeply with every single sense that you have. You can do this by yourself. You can do this in therapy. You can do this by connecting with other loved ones, friends. You can do this introspectively during journaling sessions and deep emotional work, meditation practices, somatic practices. You can do this through support groups. But grieving means feeling, it means expressing, and it means connecting with others. All of these are the most important tools and techniques to help you work with your grief. Inner child work, parts work, journaling, talking, crying, expressing, restorative movement practices like walking and yoga. But feeling, and expressing is the way through our grief. Any way in which you can help to release the old and create the new. Any way that we can let go and yet open. Self-love, self-compassion, and unconditional presence with yourself. These are the most important qualities that you can give to yourself, because you need a parent, you need a lover, you need a friend, you need kindness, you need compassion, you need acceptance, you need understanding, you need love, you need to be heard, you need to be witnessed. And this is where praying really helps. Connecting to your spirituality, connecting to God, connecting to the oneness of the universe helps us to realize that we're not separate, we are not alone, we are not lost. Because when we come back from separation and loss, we are coming back to God, we are coming back to oneness, we are coming back to wholeness, and we are coming back to love. And that is the journey and the self-discovery and the transformation of grief. Okay, so now I want to address an important topic, the topic of depression. I want to look at depression as an emotion in the sadness family, not as a mental illness that requires medication to treat, which I do not believe, but as a collection of emotions in the sadness family that is there for a reason and needs to be worked with in order to be overcome. Now, depression itself is not an actual emotion, but a collection of emotions within the sadness family. Depression is a deep, pervasive feeling of sadness. It's a deep sense of hopelessness, maybe a long-lasting feeling of grief. So, like grief, depression lasts over a long period of time. It's a sadness that extends beyond what others would say is a normal period. So it's unlike a specific bout of sadness that comes from a specific loss or in a specific event or a specific experience or the specific ending of a relationship or the specific loss of a job or the specific reason for the emotion of sadness, but rather it's an emotion of a lingering, deeply pervasive emotion of sadness that feels all-encompassing, that feels long-lasting, and that isn't necessarily linked to an event, to an experience, or to a specific loss, but more a blanket of sadness or an emotional state or a general mood. It tends to linger, drain your energy physically, mentally, and spiritually, and it makes life feel overwhelming or meaningless. So when people talk about depression, they usually talk about a general blanket of sadness or a general blanket of hopelessness. It usually comes with sensations of numbness, of sensations of heaviness, and it's usually described as a sense of being stuck or being overwhelmed or being disconnected from life, from your purpose, from your soul, from others, or from yourself. So there's a mix of general sadness, there's a mix of hopelessness and despair, there's a mix of grief, there's a general heaviness and fatigue and exhaustion. And often it's accompanied with a sense of apathy, disconnection, and disinterest in life. So things that once brought you joy, that once brought you meaning, that once gave you purpose, no longer do. So when we're looking at depression as an evolutionary or biological or having a biological purpose, we may say that depression serves or signals us to slow down, to disconnect, to reflect, to withdraw because we need to change. Because our life as it currently is does not work for us. Our life, the people in our life, the goals that we have, the dreams that we have, the relationships that we have, the purpose that we have, the reason that we have doesn't really align with our soul. It doesn't really align with the truest parts of ourselves. And it signifies a need for a big shift or a big change. So if we're looking at this in evolutionary or biological terms, this would be pointing us to reevaluate our life, to relook at our life circumstances, to make a big change, to show us that we're out of alignment with our true self. It's a massive call for change and reinvention to help us or to point us to get back in realignment with the truest parts of ourselves, the highest parts of ourselves, with our soul. But depression can confuse people. It can confuse you. It can confuse your families. It can confuse doctors and medical professionals because it's not necessarily linked to a specific event, a specific reason. It's just a general feeling that things aren't right, that you're not aligned with your truest self. And therefore, you just can't find joy or meaning or purpose or connection to anyone, including yourself. And the reason why depression is harder to pinpoint is because it's really an internal job that needs fixing. It's at the soul level. We're not connecting to our truest self. We're not connecting to our intuition, to our inner voice, to the part that's connected directly to God. And so in order to heal and alleviate depression, one of the first and most important practices is mindfulness. It's always mindfulness when it comes to feelings in the sadness family. It's getting into the present moment, really presencing yourself to find out what's here right now, to allow what's here right now to be seen, to be heard, to be felt, to be experienced. Because unless it's seen and experienced and felt and witnessed, it can't be processed. And if it's not processed, it can't transform or change. And as we know, depression is the deepest call for change, for growth, for expansion. And so that first must come from awareness, from presencing, from mindfulness. Start with mindfulness practices to create space between yourself and your emotions, to create space between yourself and your sensations, to create space between yourself and your thoughts, to ultimately come to realize that you're not your thoughts, you're not your emotions, you're not your bodily sensations, that you are actually awareness. So using mindfulness techniques or grounding techniques helps us tap into the present moment and become more aware of this space and more aware of the awareness that we actually are, of the consciousness, the higher consciousness that we actually are outside of these feelings in our body. So that is the first step, because we can't create change. We can't create even small goals or small changes to work toward unless we can really know that we're none of these things and that we're connected to God through our soul, and that we need to connect into this inner voice and start to live in alignment with it. Depression also comes with a lot of negative self-talk, negative self-judgment, negative self-criticism. And so we really do need to work with the mind. We need to work with our thoughts, and we need to start learning self-compassion and self-love. We also need to learn how to express our emotions when it comes to depression, because we are likely suppressing, rejecting, or denying our emotions, what we feel. We're not allowing them to actually be felt, because there probably is reasons for your sadness. And although it feels like a general blanket of disconnect and of apathy, there usually is events in the past. There is big losses. There is big disappointments and big sadnesses and big griefs in our life that we really haven't fully felt, that we've denied, suppressed, rejected, disowned, ignored, pushed down, and it really needs to come up and be felt. So learning how to feel these emotions through journaling and speaking to a trusted friend and using creative outlets to really express some of our sadness emotions and linking them to certain people, events, or situations or experiences in our life is going to help a generalized depression. This is therapeutic writing and journaling and expressing and talking to a friend or working with a therapist and letting it out, letting it be felt, letting it rise, doing emotional freedom technique tapping. It's important to use physical movement and exercise when we feel this general state of depression. We want to get the emotions moving. Emotions are energy in motion. We need to bring movement back to this stagnant blanket of sadness that hangs over us. Movements like stretching, walking, running, getting endorphins, moving. This is all going to elevate the mood and get things that are stuck to start to move again. We also need social connection. We need to start building relationships with others and with ourselves. That's built on trust. That's built on respect. That's built on honesty. That's built on love. We have to be able to share, be vulnerable, and connect deeply with others and ourselves. This is going to help you find meaning and purpose back in life. So reaching out to a friend, building friendships, building on your relationships with others and yourself is of vital importance. And then just general rest and recovery, more sleep, more rest, more self-care, giving yourself permission to slow down. When you're in a depression, the body's requiring you to slow down. The body's slowing down for a purpose. So respecting that slowdown and going inside and doing the introspection necessary, giving your mind, heart, body, and soul the rest, the self-care, the love, the compassion, and the space to process what's there is critically important when you're dealing with an overall depressive state. Depression gives you the gift of self-reflection. That's why it's there. There's not a specific event. There's nothing specific. It's asking you to slow down, to look inside, to connect with your inner self, that inner voice, to listen, and to deeply reflect on your life, on why you're not living in alignment with who you truly are, to deeply reflect on what's missing, to deeply reflect on what you long for, to deeply redefine your priorities in life, how you spend your time, and also to deeply reconnect with joy, with love, with happiness. You can't find happiness when you're living in a state of depression. And depression's asking you to look inside so that you can find it, to connect with anything that aligns with you, that can bring you happiness, to find out what brings you joy, to find out what gives you purpose, to find out what gives life meaning for you, to find out what you're grateful for, what you deeply want and desire, to reconnect to things that once made you happy, to learn and grow into new areas that make you curious or excited or can spark passion or joy in your heart. The state of depression is really a call to action and deep introspection on what's not working and why it's not working in your life. And then to reconnect to your truest self and the parts of you that make life worth living, that give life meaning and purpose. And we do this with love and compassion and empathy and building trust with ourselves, our most valuable and deepest relationship that we have. So please, if you're experiencing bouts or long periods of depression, know that these are complex but normal groups of emotions that are leading to this generalized apathy and fatigue and disconnect, that are asking you to connect and to energize and to move in the direction of hope and meaning and love. It's asking you to reflect and to change and to grow and to expand. And in my opinion, depression is not a mental illness. Depression is a call for deep introspection, alignment, and alignment with your truest self. Now, let's next look at another important emotion in the sadness family, which is hopelessness. Hopelessness and despair are two separate emotions, but I'm going to lump them together in this video and talk about them because they are very closely linked. Hopelessness is the feeling that there's no way forward, right? That there's no way out. There's no path forward. There's no resolution. There are no solutions that exist. Hopelessness is the feeling that nothing will ever improve, nothing will ever get better. And hopelessness often arises when we feel stuck, when we're completely overwhelmed and exhausted, when the length of sadness or grief feels never ending, when the circumstances feel too stacked against us, or when we can see no hope and we've lost all our power and our sense of control. Hopelessness often emerges after many setbacks and many struggles, when we repeatedly fall down and hit rock bottom from repeated failures, and when we feel like we've tried everything without success. And similarly, despair and hopelessness go hand in hand, though despair is more intense. Despair feels more overwhelming and more urgent. Despair is more of a state of utter devastation, but it comes with the belief that nothing will ever improve. They both come with a profound sense of emptiness. They come with a sense of being lost in the dark. They both come with the sense of extreme powerlessness. Hopelessness is a deep, dark hole that sometimes comes with apathy and an extremely long and deep emptiness and void, where you really can see no way out. Despair is very similar, but it comes with an urgent desperation and a clinging to a hope that, although it is clinging to the last grasps of hope that it has, there's actually no chance for redemption and no chance for a future. With hopelessness, there's a lot of emotional numbing that comes, a sense of disconnection, a sense of being in freeze or dissociation, feeling disconnected from yourself, disconnecting from the world, a sense of powerlessness. There's an extreme exhaustion, mental, emotional, physical exhaustion, no energy left, nothing left to give, completely worn down physically, mentally, spiritually. Hopelessness comes with a sense of losing the fight, giving up. And despair comes with that clinging, urgent energy of a deep emotional release, still trying but failing, and ultimately being forced to shut down mentally, spiritually, emotionally, conserve your energy, prepare for ultimate defeat. Hopelessness and despair are, in fact, I think, the most difficult emotions to work through, They are the most difficult feelings, and they're often accompanied with thoughts of suicide, suicidal ideation. They signal and alert us to extreme danger, to extreme overwhelm. And historically, if we're looking biologically and evolutionarily speaking, these emotions have served our species by getting us to shut down. This serves and conserves our energy. This helps us withdraw and conserve the little bit we have left for biological and evolutionary survival. It can protect us from further and future harm by emotionally disengaging us, by physically disengaging us, by spiritually disengaging us. It helps us to completely shut down so that we don't strain body, mind, heart, and soul in any area, so that we can serve any little thing that we have left for survival. This is what they call the deep freeze response. Deep victim consciousness, a complete emotional, physical, and spiritual shutting down. This is the closest that we get in our life to death without dying. And it is the body's, the minds, and the hearts, and the soul's last attempt to help you survive. It is that primal, and it is that important of an emotion. And if we are brave enough to go inward, to feel what's here, to sit with what's here, to transform what's here, on the other side of this emotion are the greatest transformations, the greatest gifts, the greatest rebirth, the greatest renewal, and the greatest reset of your life that is possible. So the gifts of hopelessness and despair are, it gives you complete clarity on what's not working in your life. It shows you that your current situation, experience, relationships, your current approach, thoughts, emotions, nothing is working. And it signifies that you need to die and be reborn. Everything needs to change. Everything here needs to be released so that you can start anew and start fresh. Because you have run out of any tactics and tools, emotions, thoughts, values, anything that are working for you any longer in your life. Hopelessness and despair force us to reevaluate every priority that we have in life. It forces a complete emotional reset. It forces acceptance of our situation and squeezes us through a portal. And the only way that we can come out is by letting go of every single thing that no longer serves us, giving control over to the universe, to your higher self, to God, and letting go of control of everything, learning to live with this uncertainty, learning to face and feel exactly what's here, being willing and brave enough to open the door to a deep emotional release that can only come from being at the very bottom. This is where we invite true surrendering. When we invite true surrendering into our life, we open the door. We literally open the door to transformation, because we can only start again. We can only grow. We can only change when we've surrendered everything that's no longer working. When we truly surrender and allow what is here to be here and let go of all control, let go of the fixing, let go of the fighting, let go, even let go of the hope of the old way of living, of the old identity, of the old beliefs, of the old values, of the old worldview, of our old self. Then and only then can we rediscover, can we find new hope, a new way of being, a new way forward, a new possibility, a crack of light. This is where we let go of our old identities, of our old dreams, of our goals, of our hopes and dreams, and anything that is still tied to the old self. This is when we must let it go, surrender, and open up to new possibilities, new ideas, new people, new change, new hopes, new dreams, rebirth in every sense of the word. We must be brave and willing and courageous enough to become somebody new. We must be willing to reconstruct and redefine who we are. And these are the gifts that can only come out of hopelessness and despair. And so when you are working with hopelessness, when you are working with despair, when you are at the bottom, when you know the old self needs to die so that transformation and growth and expansion can occur, some of the most valuable practices are meditation and mindfulness. This helps us come into the present moment. It helps us to see what's here. It helps us to become aware that we are not the body, that we are not the mind, that we are not our emotions, that we are the soul, that we are directly connected to God, and that we are directly one with all that is. Hope can grow from a oneness, from building back a connection to the whole. This is where we can begin to question our beliefs, our values, our identity, and our deepest desires. It is from here that shifting to hope, shifting to a place of hope through prayer, through a consciousness of oneness, through awareness, through practices of gratitude, through practices of calling back our spirit and taking back our power. Writing, journaling, expressing, crying, feeling, these are all part of coming back from hopelessness, from shutdown, from despair. We must come up and out of it through our emotions to be able to feel them again, to move them, to move up into states of grief and sadness, to move up into states of fear, to move up into states of anger. These states, believe it or not, these emotional states are all higher than those of hopelessness and despair. We do that somatically with somatic tracking, somatic experiencing, with trauma processing, with gentle movements, bringing the body online, bringing the thoughts online, bringing our emotion and our heart back online so that we can feel again, cry again, feel anger again, feel fear again. Helping us to come out of these states, helping us to come out of the numbness and shutdown and back into an emotional state of feeling, of awareness, of sensation, where we can process what has happened and move up higher and higher until we can get to neutrality, back into balance, back into equilibrium. But when you are at the lowest state of despair, hopelessness, victim consciousness, and shutdown and freeze, you need support. You need compassion. You need unconditional self-love, compassion, and support. This is where inner child work, self-love, self-compassion. You also need community support, relationship support, support from your family, support wherever you can get it so that you can express, so that you can feel, so that you can be witnessed, so that you can be heard, so that you can be understood, so that you can be validated, so that you can be seen, so that you can be held, and so that you can feel safe to feel once again, so that you can feel safe to come alive, to renew, to find your strength, to call back your power, to move towards the cracks of light in the darkness, and to find your strength to break through. This is how we emerge from the darkness, emerge from the void. We need a breakthrough. We need power back in our emotions. We need power back in our soul. This power comes from awareness. It comes from a connection to all that is. It comes from surrendering. It comes from allowing. It comes from trusting. It comes from knowing. It comes from believing. And it comes from igniting hope once again. It comes from taking back your power, empowering yourself, finding new sources of strength, of courage, of purpose, of connection, and of hope that we did not know existed. It comes from a deeper love, a deeper compassion, and a deeper understanding of ourself. So getting to know yourself, building more trust and love and presence and awareness of who and what you really are in order to rise again, in order to transform, and in order to become that newest version of hope, possibility, strength, courage, love, joy, abundance that absolutely is possible from the depths of hopelessness and despair. And along with deep hopelessness and deep despair comes the emotion of suicidal ideation. Not everybody will experience suicidal thoughts, suicidal ideation, the suicidal urge, but I feel it's important to touch upon it here. This suicidal ideation is the most desperate and intense and darkest emotional state that one can feel. It is a state of mind, body, heart, and soul, all completely and utterly overwhelmed, feeling hopeless, in complete and utter despair, with no seemingly way out. Suicidal ideation is a desperate last cry for survival. It comes from unescaping, unbearable physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual pain that simply cannot be endured any longer. Most people who contemplate suicide, who dip into and feel the emotion of suicidal ideation, do not actually want to die. They are suffering at unbearable levels, emotionally, physically, mentally, and spiritually, with pain that they simply cannot endure any longer. And they truly do not see any window, any door, any crack of light, any hope, or any way to escape this pain. It usually comes with chronic depression, chronic hopelessness, chronic despair, chronic grief, chronic sadness of immense suffering and pain with no options or way out. The person is left with no other way to escape this pain but that to end their own life. So this overwhelming pain, so the overwhelming pain is in all areas of your life. It's physical, it's mental, it's emotional, and it's spiritual. It's accompanied by deep desperation, by deep disconnection, by deep despair and hopelessness, by extreme fatigue, by extreme shutdown, by extreme freeze, by extreme exhaustion, an extreme loss of identity, an extreme dissolution of the self, the sense that you are broken and shattered beyond any hope of repair. The suicidal urge is one of the most misunderstood emotions, and it has a deep evolutionary and biological purpose, which is rooted deeply in survival instinct. It is a desperate last coping mechanism, cry for help, and action that begs to find an answer to survive. This emotion serves as a last-ditch effort of hope, a last ditch effort at stopping this deep emotional, psychological, mental, and physical pain by praying, by begging, by pleading, and by being willing to sacrifice everything, including the physical self, in order to survive. Biologically, this signals to you your desperate need and desire to live. It's a desperate signal for change, a desperate signal for help, and a desperate plea to survive. So when working with the suicidal ideation, we are working with survival itself. And the most important thing to do at this point is to remember that even though you are trapped in the darkness now, even though that you can see no cracks, no light, no way out, that there actually is a pathway out. And the key to you finding it is to holding on for dear life and surviving the moment, to surviving each moment. And that becomes paramount and key when you are experiencing the suicidal urge. Life is broken down into minutes, seconds, and nanoseconds. You are only dealing with the very second in front of you. And each second is simply coming down to the fraction of a second that you can continue to survive to the next and the next moment. It's an accumulation of nanoseconds and seconds and minutes until you can find some crack, some light, some form of help, some pathway out, some small ray of hope in which there's a way that you could and can eventually piece yourself back together. The suicidal urge requires a death. It requires a violent ending to suffering and pain in the form of death. But if you die, you cannot survive. And that is the catch-22 of the suicidal ideation and the desperate longing to survive mixed with the desperation to end the suffering and pain. So because this urge requires an immediate death, when working with this emotion, we want to work with the metaphorical and symbolic deaths in our life, not of the physical human body. We are looking for the metaphorical and symbolical death of the old self, of the self that's broken, of the self that's suffering, of the self that's in pain, of the self that no longer works, of our beliefs, of our identities, of our ego. Our current egoic identity can no longer be sustained in this lifetime, and metaphorically and symbolically, it must die. That is what the suicidal ideation and urge is all about. We must let go of this ego, of this identity, of these beliefs, of this worldview, of everything that keeps us bound to the old self. We must metaphorically and symbolically kill the old self so that we can create a new version of ourselves, a new identity, a new worldview, new belief structures, new relationships, new personality traits, a fully new identity. We must break free from every old pattern. We must kill the old patterns, the old beliefs, the old worldview, the old limiting beliefs that are keeping us stuck in this suffering. We must kill the old way of life, the old relationships, the old way of living, the old way of thinking, the old way of perceiving, the old way of identifying. All of the old habits and memories and past traumas and patterns. We need to break free and kill off this old dysfunctional self that can no longer exist the way it's living, so that we can kill off the fight between who you once were, this old dysfunctional self that's not working, and the new self that you need to create in order to function, piece yourself back together, and come back into wholeness in this world. So when we are working with this desperate and dark emotion, we are working in seconds. We are working in nanoseconds. We're acknowledging and facing and witnessing and hearing every single emotion, all of the unimaginable, unsaid, unheard, unwitnessed, physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual pain. We need to acknowledge, witness, validate, hear. We need to talk to somebody, let it out. Emotional writing, journaling, feeling, expressing. Once we feel all of this, once we see all this, we can create an emotional detachment from it. We can use our awareness practices to realize that we are more than the mind, more than the body, more than the heart. We are more than all of it. We are the awareness. We are the space. We are the God consciousness itself. We are the unending, enduring, everlasting, undying awareness, consciousness, presence, connection to the source of all that is, and we are eternal. We need to learn how to connect and feel back in to the piece of ourself, our soul that is connected to eternal life, to eternal love, to eternal consciousness and awareness and connection and oneness and love. And from here, we can reconnect to our mind, to our body, to our heart, through our soul, through this awareness, through this connection of oneness, through the truest part of ourself that is connected directly to God and all that is, through the deep presence and awareness and space and consciousness that is much more than this human body that we live in, that is much more than our thoughts, our emotions, our experiences. And when we can open up to this, when we can see this, even a crack of light, even a crack of hope, even enough space or enough awareness in each second, in each moment to build outward, to expand, to grow, and to ultimately realize who and what we truly and really are. Then we can begin to use our mind, our body, our senses to piece the illusion of our false, shattered self back together into the wholeness that we already are, into the wholeness that we always were, into the wholeness that we will always be. And this is the radical call to change, to growth, to expansion, to transformation, to emotional, to physical, to spiritual, and to emotional liberation, to embrace and create your new self, to create and to know a new identity. This is about rebirth, growth, expansion, and to reclaim your own power, to reclaim your sense of self, to reclaim your connection to your soul, to God, and to the oneness of all that is and all that ever will be, and to realize that you are a part of it. It is from this place that we can begin to kill off the old and to create the new, the most authentic and self-realized and self-connected and full of self-awareness and self-love and the presence of oneness and God. This is the power of the suicidal emotion, the most intense, the darkest, and the most profound emotion in the sadness family. So I hope that you can see that the sadness family of emotions comes in the form of mild or moderate disappointments, to an overall feeling of sadness or loneliness, to the deeper feelings of grief, and to the extreme feelings of hopelessness and despair. And that in the end, even though sadness is one of the most isolating and lonely emotions. It is the part of the shared human experience that touches all of us. It reminds us of our strengths, of our capacities, and of our ability to hold both pain and loss, as well as joy and the possibility of transformation all at one time. Sadness is really the emotion that invites us to heal, that invites us to transform, and that invites us back into wholeness and back to freedom. So we are not really trying to heal our sadness, trying to heal our grief. Our grief and our sadness are trying to heal us. And when we open to that sadness, to that grief, to that despair, to all those disappointments, and even to hopelessness, we are opening. We are opening to growth, to expansion, to love, to oneness, to light, to renewal, to freedom, to abundance, to possibility, and to full and complete transformation. So I hope that you've enjoyed this video. If you received value from it, please hit the like button and subscribe. And if you haven't seen the other videos on anger and on fear, go watch the entire mini series. If you want to learn more on how to work with me, how to take my program, or how to heal yourself from chronic illness, you can check the links below. I want to thank you for spending your valuable time with me. I'm sending you all my love, and I will see you in the next video.